Good evening, everyone. My name is Kara Wild, and I'm the current president of Queens Bench Bar Association. Thank you so much for joining us for the second part of our Fight for Democracy series, Know Your Ballot Measures. The first part of the series in June, which focused on voter protection, was a great success thanks to our amazing speakers, two of whom are joining us this evening. We would like to thank ADR Services for being such a wonderful host of this series. And we would especially like to thank our partner for this series, Women Lawyers of Alameda County. One important part of maintaining a strong and free democracy is being well educated about what we're voting for, which is why we're honored to have Helen Hutchison of League of Women Voters here to guide us through the state and local ballot measures. But stage, she says. Okay. But first, we wanted to provide you with an update on voter protection measures from Dina Belenkoff of Vote Pro Pros, who was here at the last event. Dina is a member of the Vote Pro Pros leadership team. Please welcome her.
Okay.
Hello. I was here back in June talking about Vote Pro Pros, the organization that I volunteer with. And this is a little bit of a pitch to invite you to join me and work with Vote Pro Pros, but it's also kind of echoing what Michelle Obama said, which is you need to do something. And to help you maybe find your way, I need to stand in the middle, find your way. To do something, to volunteer in a way that has meaning for you and that you can manage given your schedule. So just in brief, Vote Pro Pros is a grassroots group, entirely volunteer, quite large at this point. And we work year round. We do all of our work remotely from our phones and our computers, which makes it kind of easy. But we only do voter protection projects. We don't go do get out the vote or anything persuasive, that kind of thing. We are focused on making sure that people can cast their ballots and that their ballots are counted. So I'm going to talk about 5 ideas for the kinds of things you might do. Some of them Vote Pro Pros is doing, and I'd be happy to give you some guidance about how you sign up or how you get involved in any of these actually. But a couple of preliminary remarks, one of which is don't stew looking for the perfect high impact project, because what's really needed now is just an army of people to go out and work with voters one by one. And there's some work that can be that's better done as a lawyer, but most of it is not. You don't need to be a lawyer to do most of the voter protection work, but your legal skills are highly valued, your ability to problem solve with voters and sometimes read a statutory scheme. So that's good. And like I said, it takes thousands of people doing this work to help voters, and it is truly a one by one, voter by voter thing to do. So the other thing that's happened since I was here, or it was in the process of happening, is that some of the laws have changed, or looking a little bit longer term. A whole bunch of voter suppression measures have been enacted in various states. There's some good news in some states. Some pandemic era restrictions that were loosened up during the pandemic have been tightened again. So for example, if you're sending in an absentee ballot in North Carolina, you need 2 witnesses to fill out your absentee ballot, and you must have a copy of your government issued photo ID that you slip into a sleeve in your return envelope. So, lots of hoops to jump through. And that's the kind of thing that voter protection volunteers do, is they advise people on how to do this. So sitting in California, I think I made this point last time, we're just not aware of how complex it is and difficult it is in other states. Okay, so here are my 5 ideas for things that you might do. If you were here last time, you might recall I talked about a project to help voters who are inactive on the voter rolls become active again. And it's particularly important in states that are all vote by mail, because inactive voters won't get their mail-in ballot unless they do. Doesn't mean they can't vote, but it's going to be harder. So we have been working on a project to help educate voters about what they need to do. It's actually quite simple. but there's also a time fuse on it. In some states, you need to be doing it sooner rather than later. That work was focused in Nevada and Pennsylvania. It's now gone national in all the swing states. So it's a big deal project. It's actually outside of our organization. And I can provide you with mobilized links if you're interested in doing that. So that's one. Number two, probably a lot of you have done this, get trained to be a voter protection hotline worker. That is some of the most satisfying work that you can do, and probably the work that uses your legal skills the best. And also you're getting calls from people who want to talk to you. That's probably the best part of it. You're problem solving, you're learning the scheme, you're helping see trends in what's going on in the field. You can do it on weekends. You can do it, you know, they will be open soon. Some of them are open already, but doing that is very satisfying. Third thing, go to a battleground state. It's not that hard. Go the weekend before the election and do get out the vote. There, if you have not canvassed, there is nothing like canvassing. It's the most effective, and it is eye-opening to see what's out there and what people's reactions are and everything else. And it is effective. I think the word on the street is that it's the most effective thing, the person-to-person canvassing. There are resources to support you. If you need help going to, you know, traveling or staying, there are some organizations that can help. But I've done it. I went to Virginia. I've been to the Central Valley. I mean, all over the place. It's definitely worthwhile. Okay. Number 4 is work in the Central Valley, because there's a lot going on there. And again, I have resources and links and can help guide you about what you might do. That's also, there's a lot of weekend work if you're still working. I understand it. And the last one I want to talk about is a very cool organization. Does anyone have a college student in a swing state? I figured this group, my peers, their students they've graduated, but there's an organization, another grassroots organization that is devoted to helping college students register to vote in particularly in swing states. And they have put together these campus by campus packets to help people understand what they need to do. It's complicated because you often have to default to a paper form since you don't have an in-state driver's license. Often the state will not accept anything else, and so you have to go to a paper form. Students often don't know how to mail a letter, you know, they don't know where to buy a stamp, they don't know where the stamp goes on the envelope. These are true stories from the field. What's your address when you're at college, when you're in a dorm? Varies significantly. So some colleges have stepped up their voter engagement offices and are doing really well, but this group is it's just an amazing effort to put together these college specific packets that they're then distributing. They need help. They need help not doing the research, but being what they call, I forget what they're calling it, but it's some sort of like Sherpa for the student. It's like a case management approach to make sure the student does it, and they advertise it. They have a wonderful video. They advertise it as moms getting students to register, and it's called Swing the Vote, and you can find them at swingthevote.us, and I can help with that. So those are just ideas all over the map, but as I said, the most important thing at this point is that you do something and get out there. So thank you. Happy to talk to anyone. I asked that my email address be put in the chat, so feel free to reach out to me and I'll be happy to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Dina. I also wanted to share some points with from Anna Chu, who is the director of We the Action, who was with us at the last event. We the Action is specifically voter protection for lawyers. She wanted to show a few upcoming opportunities, specifically Spanish and AAPI election protection hotline shifts should be open in the next couple weeks. For those who have Spanish or AAPI language abilities, this is a great opportunity. Also, if folks are willing to travel around the election, we will have, or rather, Lead the Action will have opportunities to do so, including in Arizona, Nevada, Florida, and Texas. So I'd encourage you also to go to wetheaction.org. It's just one word, and there's a number of opportunities you can sign up for and be part of. So now I want to introduce Helen Hutchison of the League of Women Voters to discuss the state ballot measures with us. Helen has been a member of the League of Women Voters since 1969, and I believe was president of the California chapter as recently as 2019. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. Please join us in welcoming Helen.
So, thank you, Kara. And I am going to talk about the state ballot measures. I want to just start by just saying thanks for having me and thanks for being here. This is the first time I've been through the state ballot measures, so you have to bear with me. I'm not, this is not patter for me yet. By election day, I will be able to just do this in my sleep. So I am going to do the state ballot measures. I'm going to start with a quick refresher about ranked choice voting and recalls that are on the ballots here in Alameda County. So next slide, please. So this slide shows a ranked choice voting ballot. And the ballot lists all the candidates, and then there's also a space for write-ins, so you can add a write-in name if you want. You can vote for up to 5 of the candidates there. And clearly, if there are fewer than 5 candidates running, you don't need to use all 5 columns. You're going to see 5 columns every time. Your first choice is the same as you would do for anything else. It's the person you like the best, the person you most want to have elected, your favorite candidate. And then after that, you start saying, if that person doesn't win, is there somebody else that I could see, that I could support? And you keep doing that until you get to the point where you say, the rest of these people, I just couldn't see at all. I can't support. I sometimes say, hold your nose. I mean, and I'm not going to do that. So you don't need to vote for 5, even if there are more than 5 candidates. And you can, but the reminders are vote for only 1 person in each column. It's okay to vote for fewer than 5. You don't need to fill all 5 columns. It doesn't help to vote for a person more than once. Your vote is always just counted once. And don't vote for anybody you really don't want to have elected. That's the other piece. It just kind of seems, intuitive, but just a reminder about that. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk next about recalls. In this election, Oakland voters are going to decide whether to recall Mayor Sheng Tao. If you vote yes on the recall, you are voting that she should be removed from office now. If you vote no, then you're voting to say she should be allowed to finish out her term, which goes until January 2027. A recall requires over 50%, so 50% plus 1 vote votes to pass. If the recall passes, then the president of the city council will take over as a temporary mayor. And the current president of the city council is Nikki Fortunato Bass, who is a city council member for District 2. She is also running for county supervisor. And so if that happens, then the city council would elect a new president, and that person would be the temporary mayor. And that would only last until early 2027, because we'd have to have a special election to choose a new mayor. And that would happen sometime in it's 2025. It would happen early next year, essentially. Okay, and we're also deciding whether or not to recall District Attorney Pamela Price from the county. If this recall passes, slightly different rules, because this is the county, not the city. So then if it passes, then the Alameda County Board of Supervisors would appoint a new district attorney, and that person would serve until the next general election, which is in November 2026. So Slightly different process. The recall process itself is the same. It's what happens afterwards. It's a little bit different. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm getting into ballot measures, and I'm going to first do a really quick primer on bonds because we have some bond measures on this ballot. So to get money for big projects like building schools, bridges, that kind of thing, governments borrow money. Then they sell long-term bonds to investors. And in exchange for getting the money now, the government agrees that they're going to repay those investors on a schedule with interest. Interest payments add to the overall cost of these projects. I like to think of it like taking out a mortgage. You get a lot of money at one time and you pay it back over time, and the interest payments increase the total cost, but allow you to have use of that facility or your house for that time. So the general obligation bonds are what we see on our ballots. They're the money that those bonds are paid back by the state from the general fund. So that's the fund out of which we fund a lot of our government processes. And it's where our taxes go, our fees go. State bonds need a 2/3 vote of the legislature to put them on the ballot, but then they just take a simple majority vote to pass. So the 50% plus one vote. Local education bonds, so bonds from the schools, require a 55% majority to pass. And other local bonds currently require a 2/3 majority. So it's the 2/3 requirement is at the local level. The state bonds only require a simple majority to pass. There are two other kinds of bonds, but they don't require voter approval, and we don't see them on the ballot, but just so you know, they're revenue bonds. And that from those, the money is paid back from the projects they finance. So you could do revenue bonds to finance a bridge, and then you'd pay it back from the tolls for that bridge, for instance. That's an example. Then there are lease revenue bonds, and they're paid off back from lease funds, lease payments, generally from the general fund. And that's by the state agencies that use the facilities. Again, the revenue bonds and lease revenue bonds don't require approval, so we don't see them, but they are indebtedness by the state. Next slide, please. So we're on to ballot measures. The first ballot measure on this November's ballot will be measure 2. These first measures, 2 through 6, were put on the ballot by the legislature. And then I'll talk about the petition process after that, but these first ones, the legislature is required to put some things on the ballot for us to vote on, and bonds are one of them. This first one is a bond measure. California has approximately 10,000 public schools and 115 community colleges. There are a lot of schools and community colleges that have older and outdated facilities. Many need just basic health and safety repairs, renovations, sometimes new classrooms. More than 1/3 of California students attend schools that don't meet the minimum facility requirements. That includes things like damaged floors, walls, ceilings, schools with malfunctioning electrical systems. So we have 1/3 of the students in California are in that kind of a facility. 15% of the students attend schools that have extreme deficiencies. That would be things like gas leaks, power failures, and structural damage. The state and the school districts usually share the cost for renovations and new construction. And then the state uses these voter-approved bonds for its share of the costs. And we currently do not have money to give to the school districts. The state pays 50% of new construction, and they pay 60% of renovations. And then districts who have low property values and high population of students who are either low income English language learners or foster children, the percentage goes up a little bit about what the state pays. It's not a huge jump, but there is a jump. The last state bond measure was approved in 2016. There was a measure on the 2020 ballot that failed, so there's no current, as I said, there's no current money. This bond measure would cost approximately $500 million a year from the general fund for 35 years. Next slide, please. So the people who are in favor of this say this is really needed. We need to meet basic health and safety needs for our children and our schools. People who are against it say that the state overspends on issues like free healthcare for illegal immigrants. That is. I am simply echoing the arguments that were made about this one. So, okay, next slide, please.
Or the people behind the yes and no.
So the yes would be the state legislature. These that are put on by the state legislature, it's the state legislature that's behind them. So I mean, and there are usually authors and stuff, but they got a majority vote to put these on the ballot, or in this case, a 2/3 vote to put it on the ballot. In this case, against it, I'm not sure. I was looking for proponents and opponents, and it's a little bit hard to find that yet. This is early in the election season for those of us doing ballot measure stuff. By the beginning of October, it will be really clear who's for and against which measures. But yeah.
Is there give any indication on how the funds would be distributed between the schools?
There is, yeah, there is a distribution. You have to, and I don't have it, I have it in this pile of papers I have here. And so after this is over, if you want to come back to that, I can dig it out and figure it out. But yes, there is a breakdown. And for instance, I know that there's a certain amount that needs to be for very small schools. There's been an argument in the past that bigger school districts that have better staff, this is kind of a first come, first serve. They get in line real quickly, they have their projects ready to go, and they get all the money. And so there is something in this one that is going to protect a little bit. So, okay. On to so yes, if a yes means you want to have $10 billion in bonds sold to help fix school facilities, and no means you don't. Next slide, please. Next one is a pretty simple one. It's about marriage equality. Background, and Prop 8 was passed in 2008, and it added language to the California Constitution that says that marriage is only between a man and a woman. Federal court decisions held that provision was unconstitutional under the federal Constitution, and so that has not been enforced. And in fact, even in 2015, the Supreme Court ruled that states had to allow and recognize same-sex marriages. California currently allows same-sex marriages. So why do we care about this? Well, because this language is in the state constitution. So Prop 3 would repeal that outdated language from 2008, and it would actually then add some language to amend the Constitution to provide that the right to marry is a fundamental right and would protect both same-sex and interracial marriages so that way. There's no fiscal effect of this. And next slide. The arguments for it are that it protects rights proactively against future threats, and it aligns the Constitution with current law. The opponents say that same-sex marriage is already legal, and this fixes a problem that doesn't exist. And it eliminates all rules for marriage, and therefore could open the door to child marriage, incest, and polygamy. So again, this was put on the ballot by the legislature. So it next, I think we're ready for the next slide. Yeah. So yes means that you want yes, the California would explicitly include the language to marry, and the Constitution would not be changed as a no vote. Next slide. Proposition 4 is another bond measure, and it is for safe drinking water and climate change projects. Climate change is impacting all of us in a lot of different ways, but especially farming and in California, water quality and wildlife problems. A lot of California residents don't have access to safe drinking water. If you've been anywhere in the Central Valley and some of the communities, you know that that's a real problem. Recent budget deficit, the recent state budget deficit led to significant cuts in programs that were meant to reduce pollution and greenhouse gases in the state. So they put this on the ballot. The climate change is affecting everyone in California and especially those least able to afford the protections. Prop 4 would allow the state to issue $10 billion in general obligation bonds, and the proceeds would be used, and on that'd be on the next slide, and would cost about $400 million a year for 40 years. So here's where we are for this breakdown. Almost half of the proceeds would be used on water. And that would be, increasing water supply, for water quality, reducing flood risk. And then it breaks down into other issues about wildfires and we get into then coastal flood management. There's grant programs, clean energy transmission, lots of other projects here, but smaller amounts of money. Next slide. So the arguments for this are that the threat is growing. We need to act now to prevent further damage, and it makes efficient and sensible investments. The opponents to this say it should be funded through, all these projects should be funded through the regular state budget. And it funds unproven technologies, and there's no real evidence of success. A yes vote means that you support the state selling $10 billion in bonds for these projects, and a no means you don't want the state to do that. Proposition 5 has to do, remember when I said at the very beginning about local bond measures and that they required supermajorities, the 2/3 vote to pass them. Prop 5 is dealing with that, and it's local governments, and when we say local governments, that's cities, counties, and special districts. So there's 3 different categories of that. School bonds have already had a reduction in the majority requirement, so this would be other ones. So Prop 5 would reduce the requirement from that 2/3 to a 55% for housing and infrastructure bonds. So it had those 2 specific things, and that's, public facilities are what they do. I'd like to point to libraries. I think people do that, but it's also police stations, fire stations, city halls, all that stuff. This would have no effect on the state budget, but it could increase local borrowing. And it could also then increase local housing and perhaps infrastructure improvements. So, next slide. The arguments for this one are that it gives local voters more autonomy to address the local needs, and it will help fill the critical need for housing. Opponents say that this pushes the cost of infrastructure onto local government from the state government. And we already have a very high cost of living, and that this is going to increase it. So next slide, please. A yes vote means you support the reducing the vote requirement for local housing and infrastructure bonds, and a no means you want to maintain the current 2/3 vote requirement. Next slide. This is the final one that was put on the ballot by the legislature, and it has to do with forced labor in jails and prisons. The California Constitution prohibits involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime. So California prisons require people to work, and they pay minimal pay. Prop 6 would prohibit involuntary servitude for any reason, which would mean that the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation would not be able to discipline people who refuse a work assignment. So they still could give them work assignments, but if you were in prison, you could refuse it. It does allow the CDCR to reduce prison time for people who accept work assignments. So you can get benefits for doing the work, but you can't get penalized for not doing it. The people in favor of this say that it will restore human dignity by ending forced labor, which is essentially slavery. And it will improve public safety because it will allow a more of a focus on rehabilitation. There were no arguments submitted against this one. I will say I saw an editorial in today's East Bay Times against it. And I did not read it all the way through. So I can't tell you what their argument was, but I think anyhow, just so you know that there are groups against this one. So. Vote, the yes means that you support banning forced labor in jails and prisons, and the no means you support keeping the current exception to the ban on involuntary servitude. Next slide. So now we're on to Prop 32. So the single digit numbers were the ones put on by the state legislature. In the 30s, we got the ones that are put on by petition. And it really is important. I mean, it's important on all of these measures to look at who's supporting and who's opposing. For the ones that are put on by petition, it's also really important to know who funded it. Who funded to get those signatures, because it costs a lot of money these days to get something on the ballot. On Prop 32, our state minimum wage is currently $16 an hour. Some industries have a higher minimum wage, and also some cities. The industries are fast food and healthcare. I don't know if other ones do, but the minimum wage is adjusted annually for cost of living, so it keeps going up. Prop 32 would increase that minimum wage to $18 an hour. Wouldn't lower what anybody's earning. So it would just, anybody who's between that 16 and 18 would bump up to 18. The fiscal effect on this one's a little bit difficult to figure out because there will be some increased wages for some state and local government employees. We have employees that are earning minimum wage. We might also have fewer people who qualify for Medi-Cal and CalFresh, which are state costs. So it can't figure out which it is. So. Next slide. So the arguments for this one are that many full-time workers can't afford the cost of living in California, and this increase will help it. It also improves the economy because people will have more money in their pocketbooks to spend, and that creates more jobs and boosts the economy, local economies. The opponents to this say that it will hurt businesses, especially small businesses, because of the higher operating costs, and that it would lead to higher prices and job layoffs. This was put on the ballot by somebody named Joe Sandberg, who is an investor. I don't know who he is or what it means, but okay. So a yes means you want to raise the minimum wage to $18 an hour, and a no means that you do not want to raise it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
For some reason I thought that we'd already agreed to raise it to 20.
We agreed to raise it to 20 for fast food workers. And is it for healthcare workers too? I know healthcare workers have a higher minimum wage, but we agreed that fast food workers should have $20 an hour. This would do the overall minimum wage. So, yeah. My brother-in-law works in construction, and he will tell you that you don't pay any workers minimum wage because you can't get anybody to work. We have to pay well over minimum wage to get the workers. Prop 33 has to do with rent control. We know housing is expensive and that there's not enough housing in California, and because we have limited housing, that leads to the higher prices. Rent control limits how much landlords can increase the rent each year. About a quarter of people in California live in areas with rent control. We have rent control here in Oakland, in San Francisco, in Berkeley. I think a lot of the Bay, LA definitely. Yeah. So lots of areas have. The state law limits the rent increases to no more than inflation plus 5%. There's a state law called Costa-Hawkins, and that restricts rent control. It says you can't have rent control on single-family housing, and you can't have rent control on housing built after February 1st, 1995. So anything built more recently than that. It also says that rent control can only be for existing tenants. So once a place becomes vacant, you can go back up to market rate rent. Prop 33 would repeal Costa-Hawkins, and it would allow local governments to regulate rents on all kinds of housing. It would not change a landlord's right to do a fair rate of return. The fiscal effects, there's nothing for the state ballot, nothing on the state budget. It could reduce property taxes locally. And it could also have a new cost to enforce rent laws, but it's hard to estimate any of that. So next slide. And the arguments for this, the supporters say that we want to protect renters and keep them housed, and keep housing more affordable. We want to allow local communities to set their own rent control rules. The opponents say that it will increase costs to build housing, resulting in less housing, and it will ultimately then drive up costs for renters. This was put on the ballot by the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. So I'll talk more about that when we get to the next ballot measure. So just so you know, they own a lot of rental housing, but they also, okay, that's enough. So a vote on this one means that a yes vote means you want to eliminate the current limitations on rent control, and a no vote means you want to keep the rules as they are now. So on to Prop 34. Prop 34 is an odd one, and I'm going to try to describe this. It restricts the profits on prescription drugs. So Medi-Cal provides healthcare for low-income Californians. There's a federal program that requires drug makers to provide a reduced price drugs to providers who treat low-income people. So Medi-Cal is one of those, and there's low-income drugs that they can get. And Medi-Cal providers can access those low-price drugs. Those providers who are getting the drugs, when they're selling them to Medi-Cal patients, they have to sell them at the low cost. But they can also sell them to people with private insurance, and then they can get a profit on that. They can make a profit on it. So it provides some income for these Medi-Cal providers. The money they earn from this can be used for anything they want. Well, Prop 34 would create some new rules for these providers. First of all, the rules would apply only to those providers who spend more than $100 million over 10 years on non-healthcare related things, and who operate housing units with multiple safety violations. Well, the only healthcare provider that we know of that fits this is the AIDS Healthcare Foundation that put the previous ballot measure on the ballot. The AIDS Healthcare Foundation has done rent control, has measures for some time. They have been the primary funder of this. Okay. What it would do is it would then require that they spend 98% of the money that they earn from these drug sales on direct patient care. The fiscal effect of this is pretty minimal. There'd be some increased state costs because we'd have to enforce this new law. So the people in front and in charge of this, who for this say it would ensure better patient care, and would make the program that requires the state, it would make the program permanent, and the state would be required then to negotiate lower prices for all the Medi-Cal drugs. Right now, it's just some, but it's a lot, it's important ones. Opponents of this say that this is an attempt by the California Apartment Association, which is a group of landlords, to control the AIDS Healthcare Foundation for its work supporting rent control. It weaponizes the initiative process, and no one would be safe from retribution by wealthy opponents. So this was put on the ballot by the California Apartment Association. And as I said, only one organization meets the specifications. So it's kind of dueling ballot measures. And I guess I'm supposed to remain neutral. Okay, so a yes vote means you want to restrict the spending of prescription drug revenues, and a no means you don't want to impose new restrictions on the use of the prescription drug revenues. That's Prop 34. Prop 35 has to do with it's another thing about Medi-Cal, but it's different. Oops, I gotta get back to mine. Here. California has a tax on managed care organizations, healthcare plans. It's not permanent. It's approved periodically by the state legislature. They've done that over the course of multiple years, and it will expire in 2026. The tax is currently matched by federal funds, and is used to support Medi-Cal. And under the current rules, it actually reduces the cost to the state for Medi-Cal because you get this tax and then you got federal money coming in too. Because it's imposed by the legislature, the money goes into the general fund. It has been used historically to support Medi-Cal. Prop 35 would make this tax permanent and make it a requirement that it support Medi-Cal. The fiscal effects, the legislative analyst says that there'd be more money for Medi-Cal for a few years, but it's not clear what would happen after that. Just because we're not sure what's happening with the federal money. So, the arguments for this, supporters say, it protects the funding for healthcare. It provides dedicated funding. There are no opponents on the ballot to this one, but there are arguments that I've seen against it that say it reduces flexibility in the state budget because it's ballot box budgeting and it is permanent. And it also restricts how Medi-Cal funds are spent because it says not only does it have to go to Medi-Cal, but it has to go to particular programs within Medi-Cal. So it doesn't allow for future changes and needs. This was put on the ballot, as far as I can tell, by a group of doctors and hospitals. The state legislature didn't feel a need to do this. Enough opining. So a yes vote means you want to make the MCO tax permanent, and no means you want to keep the current system of renewing the MCO tax by the legislature. The last one on the ballot is Prop 36, and this is one I think I'm starting to see ads for already a lot. I feel like I am talking to attorneys and talk about law stuff, but I start by saying, there's felonies and misdemeanors. Felonies are severe crimes, and misdemeanors are less serious. In 2014, California passed Prop 47, and it changed some felonies to misdemeanors. That included shoplifting, less than $950, and drug possession. Those were kind of two of the major ones. And it led to fewer people in prison. It also said that the money from the savings from that lower incarceration rate had to go to mental health, drug treatment programs, victim services, and programs to keep kids in school. So that was all of that. Prop 36 would reverse some of Prop 47. It would make some of these misdemeanors back into felonies. It's selling or providing illegal drugs if it leads to a major injury. Shoplifting if you have a conviction of 2 prior theft convictions. Holding drugs with a past drug conviction. So if you're holding drugs, if you've had a past drug conviction, then that becomes a felony. People convicted of selling and providing drugs would have to receive a warning by the judge that they could be charged with murder if somebody dies as a result of the drugs they provide. The fiscal effect of this is a little bit difficult to tell because it's dependent upon what happens with prosecutors. What are prosecutors going to do with this? We definitely would have a higher prison population, probably also a higher jail population, though that's a county jails, state prisons. And it would be a reduction in those savings for the programs that have been funded by Prop 47. So people in favor of this, oops, go back one, sorry. The people in favor of this say that we want to make communities safer and hold thieves accountable. We want to reduce crime and substance abuse by mandating treatment for felony drug offenders. And opponents say we want to make, it would actually make California less safe because we're going to reduce the funding for the crime prevention and treatment, rehabilitation, and services for victims. And it would cost billions of dollars to imprison more people without actually reducing crime. This was put on the ballot by a California for Safer Communities kind of coalition that looks to me, but I'm not quite sure that it includes district attorneys and sheriffs in that, but also some people. I couldn't tell that they don't have the money, so I'm not sure where the money came from. So, but anyhow, so a yes vote means you want to increase the penalties for some crimes here in the state, and no means you want to keep the laws the same way. I'm going to add one more website just to say if you want to find out what's on your ballot and find out more about what's on your ballot, it's vote411.org. That is League of Women Voters national website. You'll get, but you put in your address and you'll just find out what's on your personal ballot. And we have volunteers out there now scurrying around to get more and more resources there, trying to encourage candidates to put statements on the ballot on that site. So you should be able to see lots about what's on your ballot. Yeah. So the state league has taken a position on some of them, and but I'm here in my nonpartisan, which I mean, you know, my neutral position. I will say the lwvc.org has it listed what the positions are. More questions? The chat. Yeah.
Actually, I have a question.
Yeah.
So, you know, we discussed, one of them was sort of budgeting by ballot box. Do you have sort of how you feel about that?
So ballot box budgeting is something that's very popular now. Voters like to know where the money's going. But on the other hand, it reduces the flexibility in the long run. It also reduces the amount of money that our legislators, the people we elect to do the budgeting, have to play with. I mean, not to play with, but to actually allocate and to look at current needs and say, this is where that, you know, we have limited money. This is what's most urgent this year. So it limits. However, voters like it. What some places are doing is they're saying, you know, it has to go to this particular program, but it has a sunset clause. After 8 years, after 10 years, then it will go back, revert to being more general fund. The one here that had to do with the MCO tax is not, there's no sunset clause on that. On that one too, it's not clear that the federal government is going to keep up their matching part. We never know. I mean, what's going to happen with their support. Any more questions that we have? I can't have done that good a job.
One thing I was gonna, that's the poor, I think, information. Because I mean, oftentimes it's close to the election, you're reading your pamphlet. I mean, are there sources you'd recommend we check out other than League Women Voters, obviously?
So that's the Vote 411. If you want a really quick and dirty kind of a thing, there's something called the Easy Voter Guide, and that the League of Women Voters and the California State Library produced that. And it used to be for new voters. I mean, we said it was for new voters. And because it was put together by a literacy project, and so it was adult learners. And what we found is that we now say the new and busy voter because it does give a very succinct, quick look at it, and then tells you where to go if you want more information. So when I'm looking at ballot measures, I always start with the Easy Voter Guide. because it gives you that couple sentence review of what it is and what the arguments for and against it are. Yeah, Katie.
I think you mentioned this at the beginning, but could you repeat where the bond measures, like how the general obligation fund works? Like how it's paid back? the
So,
bond
yeah,
measures?
general obligation bonds are paid back out of the general fund. The general fund is the fund, I mean, California has lots of different funds. We have, our gas taxes go into a special fund and that goes to roads, that kind of a thing. But the general fund is where most of our taxes go, and fees. And that's where the state legislature does most of its work. Every time we pass a bond measure, we obligate some of that money for 35, 40 years. And so you need to know that you're obligating that money, and the state legislature is gonna have that much less money, legislature and governor, I should say, that much less money for the budget. But by the same token, we have the money to build things, so, yeah.
But an obligation against against a bond is different from passing a new tax, right?
Right, a new tax is a tax on somebody, right. No, a general obligation bond is just, we're gonna borrow money and we're gonna pay it back out of the revenues that we have in our regular income stream.
And none of these bond measures had a tax
No,
associated with them.
no.
They were all against the general obligation.
They're all general obligation paid for by out of the general fund. And that is the standard way we do school bonds. And then these kind of, I'm going to call it infrastructure bond. I mean, it's water infrastructure and then the parks and stuff, but that is the way we do those. That's the general way that California funds things. I think most states do. I don't know every state, but I would assume they do, because you don't have the money. I mean, it's like, do you have the money to go buy a house right now in your bank?
Actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So
Please.
sometimes these voter guides do not include information on judges. Do you have a source to find information on judges that's up for a judge that's up for an election or re-election?
Judges are very hard to find out about. I personally say check with the Bar Association and see, what's happening there. I also check with my friends who are attorneys. So you friends who are attorneys, sometimes you know about judges. Yeah.
There's, I will say that a lot of times they're not on the ballot if they're unopposed.
That is correct.
So some people don't even realize that there may be a judge who's running for an election.
Right.
And they also do seek endorsements. So sometimes you can get more information
Yeah.
just on who's endorsing them.
Right. No, judges are really hard to vote on, and I say, don't vote uninformed, please. So if you don't have to vote on everything on the ballot. So if you don't know, you can leave it blank.
Better just to not vote on something like that.
Yeah. That's my personal recommendation. I have a horror story about that I voted for somebody one time because she was a woman, and turned out to be not necessarily a good idea in
Yeah.
that case.
Lots of times I sometimes just person. That's not.
Well, so you need to know, are they doing a good job? And that's the question. And that's why asking, attorneys will sometimes know, sometimes they don't. But I think the Bar Association, their work to vet judges is pretty darn good.
And by the same token, there's a
Yeah.
lot of state positions that so-called nonpartisan are just not very well known.
Mhm.
And you'll have like these people running, and you know nothing about the position, you know nothing about the people. Is there any way you can find out information?
You can look at their websites. You can look at endorsements. I look at who they have on their website, but newspapers also interview those people. So look at in the big papers around the state will be interviewing and making endorsements, and that's another source of information. But it is difficult. And, you know, sometimes there are candidate forums for some of those races.
Actually, the the Alameda County Bar Association is having a candidate forum
For the,
on judges who are running.
yes. Yeah,
So
right.
look for the
Yeah.
affiliate organizations who would host something. like that.
exactly, yeah. But for the state, those state, the offices under the governor, it's hard to find candidate forums. Sometimes there's some media that does something, but not always. I like to think that Vote 411 would have information, but not all candidates will put information there. You can find out what the office is about on Vote 411, but you can't necessarily get statements from the candidates. Yeah.
My question was with regard to the propositions that are seeking to buy bonds for certain initiatives.
Mhm.
Are those generally for specific periods of time? Do they sunset? Or is it permanent as the ballot box tax that we discussed?
No, bond measures are paid back over a period of time. And for the school bonds, I think it was 35 years and the water bond was 40 years. I could have those two numbers reversed, but it's usually, I mean, it's a long period of time, but it is a period of time over which we pay the money back. So it's, you know, it's paid once the money's paid back, then that bond is retired. Yeah. Yeah.
Are these the only ballot measures that we're gonna snap to see or potentially qualify?
No, this is all we're going to see statewide. Locally, there was going to be a regional housing measure that was pulled from the ballot. That was the one I was going to talk about that, but it got pulled from the ballot. And then there's some here in Oakland. There's a bunch in Berkeley. There's a bunch in San Francisco. San Francisco always has local ballot measures. But I'm not gonna, I mean, there's nothing else than that. You can find out about that from your ballot pamphlet. You'll find out some information, but you can also, again, look on Vote 411 and you should be able to find out some basic information about each of those measures. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're more than welcome. Yeah. You have this.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Helen, and thank you so much, Dina, both of you, for your part in not just tonight, but in our part one series of the series as well. You've been, you know, really valuable contributors. So to conclude, I just wanted to make a couple of announcements. For Queen's Bench, we have some upcoming events. On October 30th at noon, we will be having our MCLE focused on wellness called Bliss Not Burnout. Provides 1 credit for competency and wellness. So if you want to register, please visit our website, queensbench.org. And also before then, we have our judges dinner on October 9th at the Hyatt Regency at 5 Embarcadero with guest speaker Professor Mary Ziegler. Tickets and sponsorships are still available, so please visit our website to register. Andrea, you have
Yes, if you would
announcements?
mention the judges reception on October 24th.
Yeah, so Women Lawyers of Alameda County has their judges reception on, yes, as she mentioned, October 24th. So if you want to register, please go to their website as well. Anything else? All right.
We did get one final question from Gretchen. Wondering, do you have suggestions for how to find out more information regarding the party committee reps?
No.
Probably the party, maybe?
Party,
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions before we close? All right, well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Have a wonderful evening. And we'll just good luck voting.
Yeah.